So Father William, your turn. We look forward to your talk.
Thank you very much, Dan. It's a great pleasure to be with all of you once again and to share something on the Cloud of Unknowing, and specifically looking at the prayer word, or what is now, I think, quite acceptably being called the mantra. But before I do that, I wanted to tell you about something that happened to me this morning. We are right now in Western Massachusetts at the very height of the autumn foliage. I don't think it is there's so much of the tourism this year, but normally at this time of year, we get buses of people from places that don't have this beauty, and they come here for the day or overnight and so forth, just to look at the trees. And so they can't see them this year because they aren't traveling because of the virus. Well, I understand what they are facing because I can't see them this year either. And I'm right in the midst of them. But as from my blindness, of course, I can see vague, shadowy forms, but it's such a beautiful day. The temperature is about 75, and there is a very gentle, warm breeze going through, and a bright sunshine. And so I went out this morning in my electric wheelchair and down the road outside the back of the monastery. And I just sat there, and I couldn't see the foliage, but I could feel it. I could feel the colors. And it was just beautiful. But as I was sitting there, out of the blue, I was not thinking along these lines or trying to remember anything, or just clearly out of the blue came the memory of an incident or a story that I had experienced at St. Joseph's Abbey some 50 years ago. And it was a conversation that I had in those days. The only one you could have a conversation with was the abbot or your spiritual director. It was a conversation I had with my spiritual director. His name was Father Raphael Simon. He was a convert from Judaism, and he was also a psychiatrist. And before he entered the monastery, he was a psychiatrist at Bellevue in New York City. This is a huge, huge hospital, catering to a great extent to the poor. And they had a very large maternity ward. And he told me this story. He says, well, he was there, that one of his jobs was connected somehow with the maternity ward. And he said there were many, many babies there, and some of them, there were new ones coming in every day, newborn, who were without mothers. That either their mothers had died or their mothers had abandoned them. And these babies, they knew that it was necessary for a newborn infant to be coddled. And occasionally, when the very, very busy nurses, of course, underpaid, understaffed, and overworked, would come in, and they would change the babies, and they would spend a few minutes and holding them up to their shoulders and petting them and maybe talking to them softly. And the babies would respond with gurglings and cooings, and the nurse would have to put the baby down. But many of the other babies had no one to pick them up. And Father Raphael said after a while, he noticed that when the nurses came in, and some of them did that, he would look around the rest of the maternity ward, and he would see the other babies who were not attended responding in the same way as though somebody were picking them up and affectionately holding and petting and hugging them. And they would be cooing and gurgling in this baby way of total appreciation. And he said, Father Raphael, he's a very pious man, and he said he thought that the Blessed Mother was there and that she was offering her attention to these other babies that the nurses could not get to. Well, that could be so, but I would like to be a little more positive and maybe less devotional, but to give my idea of what was going on. I do think that it was the presence of God with these children, that God was presenting himself to these newborn children in the only way that he could, and the only way that they could respond to someone's presence, and that is by the necessary cuddling. And the fascinating thing of that, as I reflected on it now 50 years later, was that these babies were being brought into the contemplative dimension. Now, in centering prayer, what we try to do is we try to, and this is the only role that we have, according to the Cloud and other masters, the only role that we have is trying to free our intellects, our minds, from all thoughts, ideas, images, memories, words, and so that the mind would be empty. And as St. John of the Cross says, then the presence of God coming in to fill that empty vacuum would come in, and we would have this immediate experience of a oneness with God in what we call contemplative prayer. And last week, for example, I don't remember, I gave a number of talks last week, but one of my talks is, how we eliminate the ever-present noise, and as the Buddhists call it, the monkey mind of thoughts and memories and ideas that clutter up our mind and seek to present themselves when we are trying to settle down and just empty ourselves and allow ourselves to be in the presence of God. And so we have rules and ways and methods, and they're more or less helpful and effective. All of them are helpful in some way or other. Centering prayer being a very prominent way of doing this. Of emptying our minds so that the presence of God, it can be there, and we can have this immediate presence of God without intermediaries. And that, of course, is the very definition of contemplation. Well, but we have a lifetime of ideas and thoughts and images, of memories, and even, of regrets and of sorrows and of sins. And we have all of these things that we have to deal with in our efforts to enter into the contemplative dimension. But look, what does a newborn baby have to interfere with its reality of God, its presence of God at any given moment? There is nothing there. Those babies at Bellevue Hospital didn't have to take my lectures on centering prayer to be contemplatives. They were contemplatives. God was present to them without intermediaries, without the interference of ideas, thoughts, memories, regrets, sorrows, sufferings. There was just the child, and there was the reality of God. And they were there. They were, and these newborns are true contemplatives. And in that sense, it's not, please understand this, when a newborn dies, it's an occasion of great joy. This child goes from the contemplation of God to the vision of God in a moment. And it's something that makes the very angels sing for joy. And so I offer this, though, to you as an example of contemplation, one that I have never really thought of before, but which came to me just very, very strongly this morning. And in terms now of what I'm talking about, or I'm going to talk about, is the use of a mantra. These babies don't need one. They don't need a prayer word as an aid in burying beneath them, their intellectualizations, their memories and their ideas and their sins and so forth. There is just the child and God. And they express it. You know how a baby expresses the delight, a newborn baby? Well, of course, most of you know it better than I do. But they express it with their whole body. It isn't just the cooing and the gurgling and the smiling, but it's the arms and the legs are moving. And it's the entire child that is, responding to that unity and that oneness that they have with God. This is something that I'm going to be thinking about in the future with great, great joy and gratitude to God for giving me that recollection this morning. And I'm so happy to share it with you. Well, now, more specifically, to get to the prayer word or the mantra. Excuse me I keep sliding. I don't know about this chair. I keep sliding off of it into my TV set. When I was first teaching centering prayer, that was 1974, I was familiar with the word mantra. It's ultimately a Hindu word, and very, very strong and very, very popular in the Hindu and the Buddhist religions. You might say roughly that Buddhism is to Hinduism as Christianity is to Judaism. The one comes from the other. And so they both have a very strong use of the mantra. And but I hesitated. I knew from the Cloud of Unknowing that he taught what was equivalently a Christian mantra. And I'll speak of that more specifically in a moment. But I hesitated to use it because early in my teaching, outside the monastery when I was traveling a little bit, I did use it in one or two parish workshops that I gave on contemplative meditation. And the bishop was getting phone calls that this Trappist monk was in their parish teaching Hinduism. And apparently they were not able already to handle the word mantra. Even though, by the way, in the Second Vatican Council, we were strongly advised to look to other religions to see and accept the truths that they had, that we either did not have or did not have adequately or did not really understand. We were told to seek understanding from other religions. And the idea of mantra would certainly be one of those understandings. According to the Hindu and the Buddhist traditions, a mantra is a sacred word or a sacred phrase. And it's a sacred word or a sacred phrase whose purpose is to connect us with God. It's not to be an intermediary. An intermediary would stay there, but it's to bring us, to connect us with God, and then, as a general rule, to disappear. I was imprudent enough to call the prayer word in the Cloud of Unknowing a mantra. And then because of this misunderstanding, I stopped doing it for many years. Well, I'm back to it now. I've been back to it for some years. And I do it without hesitation. On the basis of, that we are supposed to learn from other faiths. And also on this idea, I love to read mystery novels. And I've read two of them in the past month that I read use the word mantra in a completely secular sense. Like, somebody who kept bothering somebody else, say, wanting to borrow money. And they would say, he came back with his mantra and he never stopped. His mantra was, he loaned me money. So, and I found two occasions of that. So the word mantra then I see has become accepted in our language, in actually a non-religious connotations. But still, it has religious connotations, and it's those especially that I want to continue to use, and especially in reference to the prayer word in our experience of centering prayer. In the Cloud of Unknowing, chapters 1 to 7, talk about the contemplative dimension, the contemplative experience, and the method of joining into that experience. And after chapter 7, at the very last paragraph of chapter 7, the author says, gather all your desire into one word. A short word rather than a long word is best. A word may be such as God or love, but choose a word that is meaningful to you. And but he says later, by meaningful, I don't mean a word that has an intellectual content, but simply a word that you are comfortable with, that you can use without reflecting on it. And then the cloud says, and listen to that word. So here it is then. You gather all your desire into one word, and you listen to that word. So this is what the Cloud of Unknowing has as a prayer word. and which we will henceforth refer to as a mantra. Now, that phrase, gather all your desire into one word, that in itself is the sum and substance of the method of centering prayer. I usually talk about centering prayer. I'll give you I'm going to rearrange my chair here. There we go. I usually give 3 or 4 rules, how for beginners in entering into the practice of contemplative meditation by way of the centering prayer methods, and I give them a little differently each time, but that doesn't matter. And you know what they are. You begin with a short act of faith, and then you conclude with a brief Our Father. And the second rule is you choose a prayer word that represents for you the fullness of your love for God, and you listen to that prayer word. And then the third rule is, if you have distractions, you look over their shoulder, you don't fight them, and so forth. Then a little more than that, but I could just as easily teach centering prayer by this one word, this small sentence from the beginning of the last paragraph of chapter 7 of the Cloud. And that is, this is it. Gather all your desire into one word. Now that's the mantra, that's the prayer word, that's the method of centering prayer. What do you do in centering prayer? You gather all your desire into one word and you listen to that word. Now, when I do my centering prayer every day, I say the prayer from the Cloud of Unknowing. O God, unto whom all hearts lie open, and so forth. And it ends with, fill my heart with your spirit so I may love you with a perfect love and praise you as you deserve through Christ our Lord. And then I say, I repeat the words, gather all your desire into one word. Because that sums up the method beautifully. The prayer talks about the theory, what's behind it, what you're doing. You're loving God with the power of the Holy Spirit, with a perfect love. But how do you do that? Why, you gather all your desire into one word, and you listen to that word. Now, if you remember, the meaning of that phrase is so important, because as I've told you time and time again, in chapter 3 of the Cloud, he gives you the method. He says, this is what you are to do. Lift your heart up to the Lord with a gentle stirring of love. And he uses the word desiring him for his own sake and not for his gifts. Now, the word desire there is very important. While it has slightly different meanings with other authors, it has a very particular meaning in the Cloud. First of all, he says, you lift your heart up to the Lord with a gentle stirring of love, desiring him for his own sake. Okay. And then at the end, he goes on to explain the meaning of that. And then at the end of chapter 7, he says, gather all your desire into one word. Now, what explicitly does he mean by desire? Desiring him for his own sake. Gather all your desire into one word. Why, very clearly, he's talking about love. And now, but there is a love and desire are actually the same thing. To love God and to desire God is the same thing. But why are there different words? Because the word desire adds on something to the word love. First of all, loving God is it's bonding with God. It's uniting with God. It's a union with God. It's a oneness with God. Or as the Middle English of the Cloud beautifully calls it, a oneing. And so in love, we are united with God in love. Well, then what's desire? Well, desire is a oneness, a uniting, a bonding with God in love, seeking out for a deeper bonding. So reaching out for more union, a deeper, more intimate union with God. That's the difference between loving and desiring. In a sense, there's no difference, except that desire is reaching out for more love. Okay, so then when we say lift your heart up to the Lord with a gentle desire of love. So it means reaching out for more love than you have. And then at the end of chapter 7, when it says, gather, I love it. I love the expression, gather all your desire. I think of Jesus standing on the Mount of Olives, looking down on Jerusalem and saying, oh, I would have gathered you under my wings like a hen does her chicks, So, but gather all your desire into one word. It's the sum and substance of centering prayer. And that's the mantra. And then he suggests, he says that use a short word rather than a long one. Well, now, and he actually says a word of one syllable is best, such as God or love. Well, he doesn't forbid you to go a little bit longer than that or experience with that a little bit, because I mean, you could use words of 2 or 3 syllables. I'm sure that's not contrary to what he's teaching. But what he does teach, if you look at it closely, is he says use the name of God. See, he says use a short word, a word of one syllable, such as God or love. Those are both names of God. And every name of God is really God or love. And we have a number of names of God that we use in the scripture and in the later traditions of the church. Now, there are others. Father Thomas Keating, for example, would teach this a little different. That's fine. I'm not entering into that. So he is right and I am right. That sounds like a Gilbert and Sullivan. Do you remember that? You were right and he is right and she is right and all is right. Anyway, it has nothing to do with it. So the one word can be, for example, a name of God that goes, into more than one syllable, such as Jesus or Jesus Christ or Abba Father, Adonai, Elohim, Holy Spirit, so I usually suggest, but not insist on a name of God. But see, the idea of gathering is that all the love that you have, maybe all of the scattered ways in which perhaps it is expressed in your daily life, what you're doing is you're reaching out and you're gathering it all together and bringing it all together into one motion of your heart. And then you're expressing it by your mantra, by your prayer word, by a name of God. And so you listen to that name of God. And this is centering prayer. Gather all your desire into one word and listen to that word. And very, very gently, very quietly, very gently, you allow that word either continually or slowly or whatever suits you. You allow that word to repeat itself. You focus all your attention, all your desire on that word. And the moment you do that, the first moment you do that, you are engaged in contemplation. You are engaged in a unmediated union with God. You are in face to face with God in a ray of darkness, in a cloud of unknowing, but in true reality, in the closest way that you can come to union with God in this life. And so you can actually, I think, I haven't done it, but I'm sure I will someday. I will teach centering prayer that way, not by the 4 norms or suggestions or rules. I will simply say, gather all your desire into one word. Now listen to that word. So listening to that word, of course, is the way in which we use the mantra. And what does listening to that word mean? Well, the Cloud of Unknowing makes 2 suggestions. One of them I don't find very helpful because I don't live in the 14th century, and we don't use bows and arrows that often in our daily life. But he says you could think of it, that word, that prayer word, as like an arrow that is shot from your heart up into the heavens, into the cloud of unknowing, that is, into the presence of God in faith. That's what the cloud of unknowing is, huh? We're into the presence of God, but not by knowing, but by unknowing, by faith. So he says you can picture it then as an arrow shooting up from your heart into the cloud of unknowing. And then another way he says it, you can see it as looking into the presence of God at the very root, the very heart, the very depths of your being, and allowing that word to repeat itself. And even some teachers say, repeat it with your breathing, or repeat it with the beating of your heart, or simply repeat it in any way that is suitable to you. I find myself, for some reason, more and more repeating my prayer word with my breathing. But not necessarily. I don't have to do it that way. I can do it independently of it, but sometimes it's easier. And I also find, and I used to teach people never to do this, but see how wise I have grown in my old age. I suggest this simply because I have found it, and I do find it sometimes very helpful. Whisper the word out loud. So gather all your desire into one word, and then I whisper my prayer word very softly and gently, and then I allow it to stop. And then I continue until I have a distraction. And then, of course, when I have a distraction, we come to how we use the prayer word, to help us. When you have a distraction, usually you found that you have stopped your prayer word, remember, which is your expression of love for God, which is a gathering of all your desire. And when you have fallen into a distraction, whether that distraction be sleep, or whether it be thoughts, memories, images, ideas, maybe even sorrow for sin, or maybe even events in the life of Christ, memories of the mysteries of the Rosary. At that time, that those things are good, the Cloud says, but not when you're doing contemplative meditation. When you're doing with contemplative meditation, you should let them go. And how do you let them go? You go back to your mantra. So your mantra is always there as a steady, you might say, a steady beam of unmediated union with God that is waiting for you and that you can reconnect with anytime you should. And so you have a distraction, and it even lasts for 5 minutes. It doesn't matter. You're not responsible for it. It's a distraction. And it hasn't really interrupted your loving of God because you have not repudiated this union that you are into in the contemplative dimension. The distraction has come, and it is objectively, it seems like an interference, but you're not aware of it. But the moment you do become aware of it, if you take advantage of your mantra, you simply say, I will go back to my prayer, Abba, Father. And there has been no distraction at all. That 2 minutes of distraction was simply a way of continuing your love for God. And the same is true if you fall asleep. What can you do if you fall asleep? You can't do anything, you're asleep. But at some point you wake up. Now you can do something. And what is it that you can do? You turn to your mantra. You say, I have stopped my prayer. I will go back to my prayer. Abba, Father. And that's what the Cloud of Unknowing calls listening to your mantra. Now, I'd like to mention one. The Cloud of Unknowing is, as I repeatedly tell you, he speaks to 3 levels in the spiritual journey. He speaks to the level of a special level, he calls, a singular level, and a perfect level. And in the special level and the singular level, that's pretty much what I've been talking about so far today. But the perfect level, and most of you who listen to me are in some way or other on the perfect level. Don't be ashamed to say it. It's an honest facing of the truth. But as I say, the word perfect is perhaps not the best word, but it's the word the Cloud uses. On this level, we may find ourselves having serious problems that might be related to the dark night of the senses, or especially to the dark night of the spirit, in which we're kind of fighting with the devil. We're fighting with sources and situations that are very, very traumatic for us or difficult for us. And sometimes this can go on for a long time, and we even begin to wonder if we should stop our centering prayer, if we should quit it altogether. And I think this is a very, very serious temptation. And so when we are confronted, though, with this difficulty, some of us never experience. Some of us experience it in varying degrees. And with this difficulty, we don't seem that we can do anything. And what we do, the Cloud says, he suggests that we change our mantra. And as you remember what he says is, your mantra should now be help. And he says, what you do is you throw yourself down before God. You say, I'm exhausted. I can't deal with this any longer. I don't know what to do. Help me. And then you keep crying for help. And he says, and God cannot resist coming to your aid. It even expresses it. It's like a child in the woods that's confronted by a bear, and his father is nearby, and the child cries out to his father for help. I don't think the bear is a very good example. We aren't accustomed to meeting bears when we go for a walk in the woods today. But nonetheless, that's the 14th century example. Cloud uses another example. It's like a man who's in his house and the house is on fire, and man is standing at the window and he's screaming for help. He says, well, even a neighbor, someone who doesn't like you, is going to come to your aid. How much more will God come to your aid? Now, I say this with the evidence of the Cloud of Unknowing. I have rarely used that mantra, help. Maybe I should use it more often, and I will think about that. And I cannot speak from any kind of continual experience of the validity of that, but at least psychologically and theologically, it is certainly a valid approach. When you're exhausted and you feel my efforts have been useless, I'm going to give up. Don't give up. Cry out. Change your mantra to help. Okay. So now, one other thing that is worth mentioning, though even prior to that degree of difficulty in your centering prayer, is, of course, I think it's around chapter 15, where the Cloud of Unknowing warns us that we should not give attention to distractions. We should not honor them. We should not directly confront them. The minute you directly confront a distraction, you are lost. You say, oh, here it is. Alexa, stop. I've got to put this on my shopping list, and you're thinking of things that you, in places you can go to buy the different items, and you're totally lost in a distraction. And then you say, well, oh, look, and I should be praying, and here I am. I'm figuring out how much coffee I need, and where I need to go to get the fresh chicken, and how I need to go to this place at that time so I don't have to. What you've done there, you see, you've given into the distraction, and that's what the distraction wants. So what you do when you confront a distraction and remember and become aware that you're in a distraction, the Cloud of Unknowing says, don't directly confront it. What the cloud says is, look over its shoulder. So what you do with the distraction, you kind of just push it aside and you go to your prayer word. And you see, your prayer word is a method, it's a help, it's an aid. Did somebody say it's an aid, you see, in terms of your going back to your prayer. Okay, I think, is it time?
It's Father William. It's 4:51. It is if you want it to be. Yes, sir.
Yes. Okay. So we'll have questions then. Do
Excellent.
we have any?
Yeah, I've got a couple. So let's see. Elizabeth asks this question. She said, what might be meant in terms of our desires in Psalms 37:4? Take delight in the Lord, and he will give your desires of your heart, give you the desires of your heart. And Psalm 20:4, may God grant you your heart's desire and fulfill your plans. So her question was, again, what might be meant in terms of our quote unquote desires in these Psalms?
Yeah, well, certainly the desires would be your love for God. I think that fits in perfectly with the Psalm.
Yeah.
But please do remember, when I started talking about desire, I said that the cloud has his own understanding of the word, and that other masters may differ a little bit in its meaning. You see, so I think that the Psalms would embrace other things, such as if you excuse me, a desire to have sons. You know, a desire for a good crop. These are worthwhile desires, you see. But out in the cloud itself, though, desire is loving God and reaching out for further love. And that also, you can put that interpretation into the Psalms too.
Excellent. Karen asks this, somewhere in the Cloud of Unknowing, it suggests that you choose your word without emotion, a word that would not evoke emotion. Desire to me would evoke emotion. Please explain.
Well, it doesn't say without emotion. It says without intellectual content, which is quite different. In fact, I would not at all be averse to choosing a word that has emotional content. That I would use, instead of the word emotional, I would use the word affective. An affective means coming from the heart rather than from the intellect. Okay.
Great. Got one more here, maybe a couple more. And I'm not 100% sure of the reference, so forgive me, but Paul says, how does your use of the mantra compare to John Maine's approach in his method of Christian meditation?
It's the same. That's my answer.
Okay, great. How about this last one here? What were the 3 levels of the Cloud of Unknowing? I only got the first one.
Special, singular, and perfect. Now, the first one is common. There are actually 4 levels, but we're not concerned with the first level, the common level. So right. It's special, singular, and perfect. That's found in chapter 1.
Oh, Megan asked a good one here. What if your desires are distractions?
Wrong desires, Megan. Your desires should be love of God. That's what your intention is.
I'm sure she's taking notes.
Yeah.
Hey, I've got one, Father, and this is a little bit, tiny bit off the subject, but you said something so profound last week. I wanted to let everybody else on this call hear it, and it made me think of it when you talked about the arrow. But you said, and it made me think of where you said last week, lift your heart up to the Lord with a gentle stirring. And the other note I made, and you were talking a little bit about, if you're successful in the prayer, but you said that our prayer in this regard is measured by the love you cooperate with. Measured by the love you cooperate. I've been thinking about that all week.
I would like to change that, though.
Oh, no.
I'm sorry. I would say it's measured by, what did you say, the love you cooperate with?
Yes.
It's measured by your cooperation with love.
Wow. Oh, man. Oh, that's gonna take me a while. Okay.
Yeah, that'll give you another week.
That's gonna be maybe 2, but that's okay. By the love, say that again.
The love that you cooperate with, because that's given you by God.
Right.
And like a child, a newborn cooperates 200%. Because there's nothing to interfere.
Yes. Father William, thank you so much.